Hello, my name is Anshu Kesavani and I work with Riverbed Technical Support. Today we'll be learning about SteelFusion Lun based snapshots and data protection. Without further ado, let's first look at the common terminologies before jumping into configuration steps and demo. So what is a snapshot? Snapshot is a point-in-time copy of LUN. Snapshots are generally taken for backup purposes. There are two types of snapshots, one being the crash consistent snapshots and the application consistent snapshot. What is the difference between the two? A crash consistent snapshots means the snapshot captured all of the virtual machine's data at exactly the same time. It doesn't take into consideration of your data in the memory or any pending IO operations. So what is application consistent snapshot? Application consistent snapshot is an improvement over crash consistent snapshot, wherein in addition to provide a basic crash consistent snapshot, we also capture all the data in memory and all transactions in process. So SteelFusion has embedded support for taking snapshots on a certain storage arrays. Application consistent snapshots are supported for both VMware and Windows NTFS. For the LUNs which are formatted with BMFS file system, SteelFusion Edge interacts with the operating system via the ESXi server that is hosting the virtual machines and use VMware tools to quiesce and flush the server buffers. So what are the sequence of events when we take application consistent snapshots? Step number 1. Based on the user configured schedule, the SteelFusion Edge will trigger an application consistent snapshot. After that, the SteelFusion core initiates an array level snapshot on the backend storage. So that means when the SteelFusion core receives this request from the edge to take snapshot, it would then ask the backend storage, okay, you go ahead and take snapshot. Then the SteelFusion core instructs the proxy ESXi server to mount the data store corresponding to the snapshot taken and registers the VM. Before mounting the data store, SteelFusion core would also ensure to unregister the previous version of the VM from the last backup job. Once step number 1 and step number 2 is done, that is the snapshot is taken on the backend storage, clone the snapshot LUN and mounted this snapshot LUN on the proxy ESXi and registered the VMs. The backup server can then connect to the proxy ESXi and then they can back up the VMs on their own defined schedule. So we can see in step number 1, SteelFusion Edge triggers the snapshot. The snapshot marker when it reaches the SteelFusion core. SteelFusion core then asks the backend storage array to take snapshot and clone the LUN. This cloned LUN is then mounted on the proxy ESXi in step number 2 and the VM is registered on the proxy ESXi. Once both of them are done, backup server can come and take backup of the VMs at their own schedule. There are a couple of restrictions. When we are using a proxy ESXi host data protection in the data center, local LUNs will not be backed up. The reason being the presence of the local LUNs is not there in the backend data center. So the local LUNs are not protected. The proxy ESXi host used for mounting snapshots should be configured outside of the data center vCenter. We need to have root credentials when we are adding the proxy ESXi host. Also, if the proxy ESXi is managed by vCenter, it should not be in the lockdown. What that means is the SteelFusion core must communicate directly with the proxy ESXi host to perform the required operations to make the VM available for backup. Last but not the least, for Windows data protection, we do not support Windows Dynamic Disk. There are a couple of requirements and recommendations. So one of the requirement is the version of the ESXi used as the proxy ESXi host must be equal or higher than the version of the ESXi running on the edges. Other recommendations include the ESXi server hosting the virtual SteelFusion core should not be used as the proxy ESXi host. The proxy ESXi host should be a standalone, not connected to the vCenter. Also, ensure that all the LUNs associated with the VM are snapshot and protected together. This would cause the data consistency. If VM snapshots exist on the edge and the VM is reverted to an older snapshot, please ensure that the state of the VM mounted on the proxy ESXi is same as the state of the VM at the branch. Let's look at the steps that is required to configure the SteelFusion core for snapshots. First, we need to go to Configure Snapshots page and then Storage Array tab and add backend storage. Then on the Snapshot Schedule Policies tab, we can add a snapshot schedule or use the default policy. On Branch and Proxy Host Data Protection tab, we can then add the branch ESXi host and also the proxy ESXi host. For rest of the configuration, we need to go to Configure Lun and then Snapshot Configuration tab. In the general settings, we need to specify the storage array and the client type. This client type can be VMware or NTFS. Then in the application consistent snapshot at the branch, we need to specify branch ESXi and some other settings that we'll see in the demo. Lastly, for the proxy backup snapshot mount at the data center, we need to specify who is my proxy ESXi and the other settings that we need to do. Let's look at all these settings in action in the next demo. Let's start the demo by logging into our appliances. This is my SteelFusion Edge, which is already connected to my core. So this edge is already using a couple of LUNs which are being presented by the core from the backend storage. Let's log in into my core appliance. As we have already seen, this edge and core are already connected. The SteelFusion core has already presented a couple of LUNs to my SteelFusion Edge, which then presented them to an ESXi server running on the device itself. Okay. This is my ESXi which is running on my ASPED appliance. On this ESXi, we have this data store which is coming in all the way from my backend storage presented via SteelFusion core, and we have this virtual machine running on this ESXi server. We also have a proxy ESXi running in the data center which we will be using for mounting our cloned LUN later. Let's look at the configuration steps on the core. For snapshot, we need to first add my backend storage. We go to snapshot page and then we can add the storage array. How do we do that? We just click on add a storage array and provide the details for my backend storage. As explained in the previous slides, we have native snapshot support for these storage vendors. I've already added my backend storage for simplicity. Step number 2 was to add a snapshot policy. So we can add our customized snapshot policy, or we can also edit the default policy. For the sake of this lab, I've already edited this default policy which we'll be using for our LUNs for snapshot. So the third step was to add my branch ESXi and proxy ESXi host. How do we do that? We go to branch and proxy ESXi host data protection tab. We can then add my VMware host vCenter for branch, as well as we need to add the proxy ESXi host at the data center. Just click on add a host, provide the details, and then just add a host. Now that we have already added my storage array, created my snapshot policy, added my branch and proxy ESXi host data protection details, we then need to go to my LUNs page. So the LUN in question wherein we need to take snapshot is my file system OS. We go to snapshot tab. Within that snapshot, we can specify what is my snapshot schedule. So in this case, I'll be using my default policy. In the configurations tab, we need to add my storage array, which we have added earlier. If we have not added it yet, we can add the storage array on this page itself. Then we need to specify the client type. In my case, this is mounted on a ESXi, so I'm using the client type as VMware. In the application consistent snapshot at the branch, we specify what's my branch ESXi server. And these are the regular expressions wherein we can specify what VMs to include or what VMs to exclude. Data center name field is only applicable when we are using a vCenter. In the proxy backup snapshot mount at the data center, here we specify what's my proxy ESXi server and the other details, wherein the first field says snapshot mount category is daily. We can choose the field from weekly, daily or hourly. What that essentially means is even though the snapshot is taken hourly, but we have selected this field as daily, so that would mean that only the daily snapshots would be mounted on the proxy ESXi and rest wouldn't be mounted. For our lab, let's leave it to daily. Then we specify what's my proxy ESXi host, which we have already added earlier. If we haven't added it yet, we can use this link to add the proxy ESXi host. So what's a proxy storage host group? So this proxy host storage group is the initiator group which is created on the backend storage, which is allowed access to clone LUN. Again, this data center name is only applicable for vCenter, and we don't recommend you using the vCenter. We recommend our code directly talking to the proxy ESXi host. Once we piece all the three together, our edge is ready to take snapshots based on our schedule. For the sake of this demo, let's take a manual snapshot. We go to SteelFusion Edge, select the LUN, go to Snapshot tab, enable proxy backup, and just take a snapshot. So if you can see, we have triggered a snapshot. This is a manual snapshot which is triggered just now. It is not yet replicated to the core, and again it's not proxy mounted yet. Now we can see my snapshot is replicated to the core and it's also proxy mounted. Let's verify this on my backend storage. So this is my OS volume. We go to snapshot copies, and sure it is. (8025) 8025. So this is the snapshot which is taken on the backend storage. Let's verify the same on my proxy ESXi, whether we have successfully mounted this snapshot on my proxy ESXi or not. For that, we go to my proxy ESXi. So this is my proxy ESXi. And as we can see from the event manager, the various steps which happened as part of my proxy mount. So the first instructions included to unmount the previously mounted snapshot and then mount the new snapshot and register the VM which is ready for my backup to come and take backup of this virtual machine at their own schedule. So this concludes the video where we learned about SteelFusion Lun based snapshots and data protection. Thank you for watching.